next talk we're going to have is going to be about that connection between cannabis use and health. We'll delve into that a little bit more. Dr. Russ Callaghan is a professor in the Northern Medical Program at the University of Northern British Columbia, and he is working on cannabis-related projects at the Centre for International, the Canadian Institute for Substance Use Research. Still learning the acronym. I just want to say that was a joint effort because you had it written wrong, and yeah, you did. It's all right. There's my proofreading skills, honestly. We're really very pleased to have you here today, Russ, for your talk on does cannabis use increase the risk of developing cancer in humans?
Great. Okay, so I want to give you a cook's tour of this particular area of research on cannabis and cancer. Over the last 5 years, it's been a concern of mine, and I've conducted a few studies now on this particular issue. And so it's going to be fairly quick. I'll just give you an overview. I'll take questions after the panel is done talking, but let me see if I can try to give you a sense of this literature in 5 to 10 minutes. So there are good reasons to think that cannabis smoking may contribute to cancer in humans because cannabis smoke and tobacco smoke contain many of the same potent carcinogens. So given that, you would think that there may be some connection, at least with that route of administration in cannabis use. So one of the other things is that cannabis smokers often inhale more deeply. There are longer breath holding times. There's use of unfiltered joints, right? No one has a filter on a joint. And so these particular patterns of smoking or this route of administration with cannabis may contribute to the increased risk. Right? So we can talk about route of administration at the end of the presentation, how it may attenuate some of the risk as well with other routes of administration. So a few years ago, my students and I did a systematic review of all the studies on cannabis use and cancer. And we identified 19 studies, and they can really be grouped into 3 different areas by the sites of cancer. So we have one particular group of studies on lung cancer, the other on head and neck cancer, so cancers of the mouth and the throat and the neck, and then the last set of studies on testicular cancer. So out of those 19 studies, almost all of them can be grouped in those 3 areas. And so I'm going to talk briefly about those 3 areas. So the first one is lung cancer. Now, lung cancer is a paradigmatic cancer associated with tobacco use, right? Almost everyone knows that tobacco use causes lung cancer, at least today. I mean, a few decades ago, it was still controversial. So in general, with the cancer-related research in cannabis, we're 2 to 3 decades behind. So it's a particular area where we don't have that many studies. And I'll try to answer the question, does cannabis use increase the risk of developing cancer at the very end? Okay, so with lung cancer, there are 7 studies. 5 of them show a relation between cannabis use and cancer. Some of them show a dose-response relation. So 2 of the best studies in the field show no relation. So it's mixed, right? It's mixed. And one of the best studies pools all the information from other studies, and they show no relation between cannabis users who don't use tobacco and lung cancer. Because most cannabis users use tobacco, right? And so that particular issue of using cannabis, it may confound the relationship. So the relationship that we see in the scientific literature that shows that cannabis users have an increased risk or hazard of lung cancer, that may be driven by tobacco. So we only have one really solid study that's pooled all the users together from different studies who were non-tobacco users, cannabis users who didn't use tobacco. And that particular study found no relation. But that particular study also doesn't have long-term users and heavy users. So in general, there isn't sufficient evidence to support a relation between cannabis use and lung cancer. But there's enough there to be cautious. Okay. So the next one is head and neck cancers. This particular area is even more diverse in terms of the findings. Some studies show no relation, some studies show a dose-response relation, and some studies show a protective relation. So there's one study on tongue cancer that shows that cannabis users actually have a decreased risk. So this particular body of research, it has mixed evidence. It's hard to gain any kind of definitive conclusion. So this last area is really interesting, and I've done a study in this area, a long-term cohort study, where I found a relation between cannabis users and the development of testicular cancer. And there are 4 studies in the field. All of them show a relation between cannabis use and testicular cancer. But there are 2 types of testicular cancer. One is called seminoma, which has to do with cancers related to the semen-producing structures of the male testes, and then non-seminoma, right? So what we have is that there's a relation between cannabis use and non-seminoma cancer types. So just that particular type of cancer. But the problem with this area, we have 4 studies, all show a relation, but we don't have a persuasive description of the biological plausibility. So anytime in the epidemiological literature where we don't have a biological plausibility, I would say to people, be cautious about that until scientists come up and give you a real plausible description of that plausibility. So those are the 3 areas that we have right now. Almost all the studies are included in those 3 areas. And the final answer that I would say is that there isn't really strong definitive evidence to support a relation, but there's enough there to make us be cautious. Okay? So one of the things about the literature that will make you cautious, makes me cautious as well, is that when we look at the studies themselves, we don't measure cannabis use very well in the studies. We might measure it in terms of frequency, but we don't measure it in terms of dosing, or how many joints people smoke per day, or the potency, or route of administration even. Right? So these are all going to happen probably in the next little bit. Now with legalization, we can construct longer term studies and so forth. So the other thing about this literature is that when you try to, in the recruitment process, we don't have long-term users who are heavy users. So when I talk about heavy users, I'm talking about people who use a joint a day for 10 years or more. So in the tobacco field, we have these long-term studies with tens of thousands of tobacco users, and we have very heavy users, and so we can estimate those relations quite well. But here in the cannabis field, we can't do that. We can't do that very well. So where does that leave us with legalization tomorrow? I think the evidence would support caution about using smoking as a route of administration. I mean, smoking is the primary route of administration right now, at least according to the 2018 National Cannabis Survey. It's one of the primary routes of administration. So it's the smoke that contains the carcinogens, right? The active components, THC, at least THC and some of the other components haven't been seen to be carcinogenic. So that's my take on the cancer cannabis field. The evidence isn't definitive yet, but there's enough to warrant caution in those 3 areas.